Hi, everybody, and welcome to this new installment of our Immersive Trailblazers series. Today, we're going to talk about education and the use of spatial computing, immersive media, AR, VR in classroom settings. And I cannot think of a better guest to have than Tom Corbin. Thank you, Tom, for being with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
So Tom is Director of Educational Technology at OunceIT, and he works with schools, educators, to help them bring this class of technology into the classrooms. And I think I'll pass it to you in a second to tell us about your journey, because I think you have a very interesting path into that side of the equation here. Just as a logistical point, we're going to have a conversation with Tom. Tom has a few slides, so I'll kind of ask a couple of questions, and we'll go through some aspects of what he's learned over the years and some things he can share with everybody on this call. And then we'll open it up for questions. So the first part is going to be 20, 25 minutes, and then we have an open Q&A, and we can take this anywhere you guys want, and kick it off. Even have side session later on if some people are interested to go deeper. So with that, Tom, thank you again. I will pass it on to you. Do you mind maybe telling the audience about your path and what led you to this role?
Sure. So I actually was early childhood education undergrad student 25 years ago. And so really my passion was early childhood and teaching early literacy. Over the years, that role brought me to different classrooms and different schools across the country and internationally. But it didn't always stay in early childhood, so it kind of evolved up. And based on the trajectory of where it started in 2001, in my professional career, technology wasn't a part of most classrooms at the time, but I always kind of leaned into technology. So, you flash forward about a decade later, and I'm teaching, I think, 5th grade, and more of these kind of immersive, multidimensional mediums kind of started to crop up as possibilities. And for me, it was always about how to sort of data visualization for young people. So whether it be this medium or other mediums, trying to really kind of show students information that would be new to them in engaging ways. And it's really difficult, pedagogically speaking, developmentally speaking, for students that haven't lived and experienced life to be able to feel and have that experiential part of their learning without field trips and without, back when Skype was the primary tool for being able to, bring experts into the classroom. So yeah, I think my journey has definitely been one grounded in taking students as far as I can, but really trying to engage them in new ways beyond just a two-dimensional aspect. And so augmented reality, for me, I think for the last 10 years has been a really, really powerful medium. So I know we have a lot of folks in the audience that are probably from higher ed. So I think some of my examples that I'm going to share are geared towards that, with that in mind, and there's really no age cap on these examples, but some of the examples I'll show are for, different elementary and middle school and high school students in sharing their work and showing how they've kind of accessed this medium.
So maybe we can start right here. Could you share with us your observation when it comes to how augmented reality, spatial computing benefits students in learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that it kind of starts with where a large portion of the content is in this sphere and where it's been. So it's interesting. I know a lot of the members of this online audience here are probably really familiar with the medium and, its sort of evolution. So I don't want to, hover too long on on where I feel like it's first started to crop up and then where it started to dip its toe into schools, but really advertising, like the opportunity to see a billboard or a coffee cup and have pieces, if you hold up your phone, come out. IKEA, I think, furniture stores have long used, AR as well, not long, but, for a while now, used AR as an opportunity to bring furniture and visualize it in a space. So it just sort of makes sense that all of that content is curated in such a way that students can really access it, and then teachers can really access it. So if we've evolved from textbooks, at least as the primary mechanism for showing students information and exploring information with them, there are other avenues. There's video, there's audio, but AR, to really truly move and manipulate an object, is just such a powerful tool in the hands of particularly younger students that might not have access to whatever that object is. On this screen right here, you'll see some examples where, and I'll click play on this video and you'll see some more, but where you can actually enlarge a planet, or, I think that's a loom, an old loom. So giving them that context where they wouldn't otherwise have that has been really powerful. So let me go ahead and hit play, and I will pause in a couple places here just to kind of highlight what you're looking at. But to answer your question, these are examples where no one created, the students didn't generate this or create this. These are resources that are easy enough to find and bring into the classroom. So, from a content shelf to seeing, in a science class, different devices, being able to spotlight parts of, I think this is Mars right here. It doesn't replace the traditional modalities of teaching, but it complements it. And I think that's really at the heart of what this is. This would be an example where, we're living in the age too, where it's very easy for a student to be able to drag down from their device, if it's an iPad or a tablet, and record directly on their screen. So without actually creating the content, they can still use what's curated for them to be able to learn about it through traditional modalities, through reading about it, through research, all of those good tried and true methods, but then to be able to show their learning in a way where they're able to record that and share without actually creating anything is really important, I think, to have the buy-in here. Here's some examples, and sorry about the shaky camera here that was used, but just showing. I think Google Art and Culture has been a great resource. Used to be Google Expedition was one of my go-tos, and then they took a lot of that content and put that into a curated library through Google Art and Culture, which isn't just AR. AR is one element of it, but I do want to actually highlight what you're looking at right here. I'm going to back it up just a second, because for me, again, with here, actually, let me show this one too. This is an example of a student being able to hold up. It is a merge cube that they used. And within that merge cube, they're sort of like a multi-sided QR code. But it basically allows you to see something, an object, and hold it in your hand. So the students get a kick out of that at a young age, but you can see where it'd be applicable for adult learners too. It's pretty powerful. But the next thing that I actually really wanted to show speaks to where the science of the physicality, the movement of a student, and where that associates with the brain and activity in terms of retention of information. So, going back to my original roots of early childhood and emergent literacy, it's really difficult two-dimensionally right on a page for students to really conceptualize spelling and phonemic awareness. So the phonics, the way that letter sounds come together. But I use this tool with some students to just have them grab a letter and then put it in the spot, right? So this isn't anything that the students created. This is just a tool that exists online, right? For them to, or through an app. But the physical process of them to be able to grab something and then place it in order and be able to use spelling words by uploading a list of actual spelling words that those students are learning, and then have those be the letters. That, to me, it's really easy to observe where student success has been heightened. And without like completely abandoning the good old tried and true, take a pencil, spelling test or a word sort. For those of you that have young children at home, you might be familiar with word sorts, things like that. But this sort of just adds that extra layer of movement to it. And I could go on and on about that. So this is just another quick example. This is actually Google Art and Culture, and being able to take that content from art from around the world, but bring it into your physical location and then study it. And then here, these are, I think, kindergartners, but seeing the Mona Lisa up there and be able to really get close to it, but then also be able to have the students sketch from it is kind of a neat way to incorporate. And then this last example that I have right here was fairly recently, again, with really young students. And I promise all my examples are not in early childhood, but this one would be the Mars rover. So NASA has some great apps through AR. There's some other ones out there that are pretty solid, but these young students were actually physically building with materials that we gave them, these Mars rovers. But to be able to see this up on the big screen as it's crawling through and driving around is, you can see at the end here, this little girl is like reaching out for it, which is kind of funny. They want so badly to touch what's there, but it gives them context. It gives them perspective of size and depth to be able to rotate something around. And when you're building something with materials, to be able to have that instead of just looking at it as a two-dimensional image on a page is definitely a whole new level of learning.
Great. And Tom, you mentioned a couple of times, I know when we're preparing this, we touched on this a little bit, which is the other side of utilizing the technology to visualize things are prepared by someone else and kind of maybe interact and, like you said, take photos or kind of make it your own. What about the other side, which is that the students can now utilize the medium as a way to have more richness in how they show their learnings? Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So showing learning is kind of at the heart of where my passion is, like from digital portfolios to just at a parent-teacher conference. And it doesn't matter the grade level, but to be able to actually hear their child reading, or at a high school level, maybe a student being able to explain their thinking and understanding of a concept is a really powerful piece of where schools have evolved to what it means to actually have a relationship and a partnership with families to show how the student has grown in their understanding of a concept. So to really put this extra medium in their hands to create has been huge. And it actually has evolved even more rapidly in the last handful of years. Even just the last 12 months, there have been new opportunities. So I'm going to show a couple examples here in this video. And these are all pieces. So like this is all student created. Some of it involves coding and programming, which it can be a barrier of entry for classroom teachers to feel like, well, these students don't have that skill level to be able to do that. But most of the tools that I use are ones that are easy enough and accessible enough, and the coding and programming doesn't have to be a part of it. But this example right here, a student in a augmented reality club that I ran for a school was actually building an airport and designed it with a whole like traffic control pattern in mind, and you can see it sort of floating there in space. This is an example of a student, they had all year to study. This is a 5th grader or 6th grader, study basically whatever they're passionate about. They could pick something. They had to develop like a thesis and sort of outline that thesis. But here is a TED Talk, but you'll see it's pretty powerful. When it zooms out, you're going to actually see that it's being held in the palm of a hand. Hold on just a second. Here we go. So TED Talk there, that's me holding it. So just a pretty powerful way of creating something and showing their learning in a unique way. I mean, I don't think I have to convince anyone of how the students were engaged with a project like this, because of how kind of neat it is, but also bringing families in to be able to see this. There are whole pieces of equity and access and working families being able to show experiences that I could go down that path too. But I might save that for later on if it's asked. But this is another example here of just the idea of pulling augmented reality to, for those familiar with Harry Potter, to make a picture come to life. So the augmented reality is really to show a unique way of where the student, in this case, this example actually was one of my kids when they're in pre-K, I think. they did all the traditional things in terms of learning, right? But this piece of having a museum where families could come and actually hold up an iPad, or fellow students could come by and actually hold up the iPad and have a picture come to life where the child's talking about what they learned is pretty powerful. Hold on, let me get to this one. Anyway, I will go a little faster here. There's some more examples of that in practice. So here, even though this doesn't look like augmented reality, these are the examples that you'll see can be put in augmented reality. The video here just captures them where there's not the realistic background behind them. But to be able to have this, to be able to build on top of like a true three-dimensional digital canvas, it hasn't existed for a while, and in a lot of different ways. And poster boards, even PowerPoints, they don't do justice to where a student can really kind of, show all of the different layers of their understanding of something. Oops, sorry, struggling with that. Let me just kind of fast forward a little bit and give you a couple more examples. Let's see. That's again, the idea of something coming to life just by scanning it on the wall is kind of unique. And students had created that. So this would be an example right here of where this student, sixth grader, studied about the inner workings of the ear canal, but they used something that was already created. But the fact that they can narrate over top of it meant they didn't spend that extra time creating necessarily, but they were able to narrate over top of it. Here's another student that's just incorporating, her learning into a sort of a hologram in front of her work. And then this last example right here just shows at a high school level, and this actually happens to be using Hoverlay right here, which, I don't have to go on about how amazing Hoverlay is. But this particular example allowed for students to be able to, I know this is one of your assets that you kind of have in there, but the students at Concord were giving tours. And I just think that their ability to create and place things in space has been strong. So anyway, I think I will go back to some of those examples later on.
Yep.
But right now, there we go.
Yeah, that's great. And one other dimension, you touched on the fact that in something that's obviously very, very dear to us, it's the snow code aspect, is the barrier to being able to bring this technology to a classroom. I'm wondering, what are some of the thoughts and maybe best practice, or your what you can share with the people online here about how you can convince teachers who are not tech savvy to bring in that technology into the classroom and experiment with it?
So there are a few different ways of doing that. And I think with AR, it's important to remember that two-dimensional objects can be brought into three-dimensional space. And so for teachers that I've worked with for a long, long time as a peer, or as a coach, as someone that is encouraging innovation in practice, it's really important to value the traditional modalities without saying, okay, let's just completely move away from that and go into this new thing. That's really difficult for a teacher that has had, decades in a lot of cases of success with proven results of how they can bring their students forward, right? But if I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and I'll show you the idea of, so I'd say opportunity one would be understanding that two-dimensional objects can be brought in and utilized. So I'll show that. And then I'm also going to show some examples of where just kind of like the classroom management of how to do things kind of quickly through templates. If you teach at a higher higher education level with older students and adult learners, then I think you can appreciate the fact that some of these examples are third and fourth grade examples. And if they can access it and kind of hit the ground running with it, it should hopefully give you some peace of mind to know that it's not impossible with older students either. So this would be an example where these students read this book by Peter Brown, The Wild Robot. And they'd had this lesson for years. I mean, probably for 10 years. I think the book itself was a new layer to it, but the mapping, the idea of actually teaching coordinates and mapping skills, that had been taught by this particular grade and this teacher who had taught at the school for 3 decades. She'd use that time and time again. And so I think it would have been a lot more challenging if I said, oh, that's great, but let's go ahead and do this completely new thing. But by having that same lesson plan of having the students be able to draw through colored pencil and coordinates, having no screens whatsoever, no technology, but then take that drawing and incorporate that and then build layers into it, it was so powerful. And obviously the students took to it and they saw the value of it, but then that teacher also saw the immediate value, and they also didn't feel like what they had been doing for a really long time was undervalued. So I'm just going to hit play here, but this is an example of they had to code and program the robot to go from one end of the island to the other and interact. So there is some coding and programming involved in this, but again, these are 4th grade students doing this. And I'll show you at the end where actually all of this is visible in augmented reality too. So you get an idea. Oh, here we go. So this is that floating in air. So it has that kind of interesting factor there. So drawing is a big piece of it. Here, again, animals, habitats. This is a 3rd grade class that they had been studying habitats or had lessons and curriculum and units around studying animals and habitats for, again, decades. But to be able to bring that same idea to life here and have the student have like a whale look like it's rising in and out of a piece of paper is pretty awesome. This would be another example. So if we look at that lowering barriers of entry, example 1 as bringing 2-dimensional into it, this would be where the classroom management piece of giving templates. This particular platform is CoSpaces that I'm showing right now. But being able to build a template and then share that out, and then the students can go in and then change it was really a strong hit the ground running moment with the teachers that they needed to see that. So what you're seeing right here is actually a lesson on The Princess Bride. I think that these were 5th graders. They had watched it with their teacher early in the morning, and they asked me, could I think of anything that would incorporate The Princess Bride? And it's a movie from, I don't know, late 80s for those of you not familiar. So the idea was a hero's journey. That hero's journey lesson had been taught for years by these teachers also, but to be able to put this twist on there, not only are you layering in templates to make it easier for them to get started, but then they can actually re-envision who that hero is, who the protagonist is. And so the end result of that one, I think I have an example here, is after they have their templates and they can go in, and I've given them sort of the starting point, then they can go in and create this. So in that case, there was put this in the slideshow. Hold on just a second. Let me catch up to where I was. So in that example, right here, you can see that there's this particular group of students changed who the protagonist was from sort of that male-dominated knight in shining armor to a female protagonist. And this particular student found one and kind of changed it to look a little bit more like them. But then this hero's journey followed this map, and that student had something totally different than the student next to him, but they each had a little bit of a head start by having a template. So that's a really important example. Another one, and you can see pictures of it, the still images over on the right. Again, the idea of giving students a template, but in this case, they were building sustainable cities, and they were doing it with cardboard and glue and actual physical pieces, but they did the prototyping digitally using AR. So they would build this city, and the elements, all of the buildings and the turbines and other things like that, I was able to kind of gather for them ahead of time, so that when they had that, they could just pick and choose and grab without doing that extra work. So they were really able to hit the ground running and get started. And you can see this example in the bottom right of this group, and it was a group of students collaborating on it, and they all were able to build this prototype. And they only used 2 days to do this part, and then 2 or 3 weeks after that to actually do the good old fashioned construction paper, glue sticks and actual physical build, which was important to this teacher. But that teacher did not look back on it as a waste of time at all. It actually really helped accelerate the process in building prototypes. There are a lot of examples where AR and prototyping can be really powerful with all kind of age students. Let me just see if there's any other part of this that shows off any other examples. Yeah, that was just what I was sharing right there. So yeah, those are a couple examples of lowering that barrier of entry for sure.
Thank you, Tom. And just maybe one last question before we open it up for questions. You touched on the teaming and kind of the strategies that you can use as an educator to get students to effectively produce with the medium. Do you have any best practice or thoughts around how to get organized? You mentioned the high school in Concord. Any thoughts around how to put together a program and strategies for students to engage?
So yeah, I think that one of the big pieces here is that Hoverlay is a perfect example here. Some other platforms have incorporated a lot of multimedia and opportunities for, kind of, if you picture this shelf where you can reach and pick and choose and select the different mediums that are going to kind of best show your learning and build whatever experience that you want to build with it. So when it comes to that approach, I think making sure that we look at each individual learner as their own individual learning profile. The ability to differentiate in education is pretty powerful. It's not going anywhere. It's continuing. I think that's the direction from early childhood to higher ed that we want to kind of go and leverage technology to be able to speak to that individual learner. But then also make sure that that individual can work as a team member in a collaborative group. So with that, all of these examples, and I can show some more, but they allow for a student that is really strong in, say, the arts or say music, to be able to kind of, all right, this group of students here, they're going to be in charge of the music composition or the audio. This group over here, maybe they're not real strong with technology, but they love to have a paintbrush in their hand. Maybe that element can exist over here, or these students over here can be in charge of, they're like really strong in computer science and they can gravitate and they feel like they can contribute in that way by maybe some more advanced rendering of a 3D asset. All of these things come together, and I say these things not just from like the top of my mind. Like, these are examples that these students in Concord actually, with this broader project, and actually let me share my screen. I can at least show you. I think I have that. Well, here at the bottom, some of that should look familiar for anyone familiar with Hoverlay, but all of the different possibilities of what you can include, from 3D assets to, audio to JPEGs. But then where these students took it, they created these tours around campus, and there was a 19th century one, a pre-19th century one, and a 20th century one. So with all of these different skill sets and this collaborative team that did the audio and this collaborative team that did 3D rendering, they came together and created these channels where the experience was definitely the sum of its parts. It wasn't just one student having to learn all of these different things, but rather like, what's the power of that own personal, what's the power of that own personal, I also want to point out that within the unique pathways here, it's really important for perspective to be told, right? So these are high school students, and they're talking about the history of Concord, and that can be a really different experience in terms of what sorry, I'm echoing there. What a female in 1950 experience in Concord. With the exact same place in the 18th century and indigenous group, what life would have been like for them. But to be able to have these channels so that you can have the same physical location but different pathways through it, really speaks to some of the students or spoke to some of these students in this case. And that's really why they started developing. And that's really why they started. Particular school just had a centennial. Sorry, that delay is distracting. Sorry, that delay is distracting. When that's coming from. Having the students be able to experience these separate parallel pathways was really important for them to be able to tell the story of their school, for alumni to be able to come back and see that, yeah, two different people living at the same time or different times in the same place can have very different experiences. And so I guess the long way of answering your question, Nicholas, was the opportunity to manage students. It all comes from how you can kind of speak to them and have them see the value of something like this. And the value can be both sort of from a narcissistic point, like, this is how I learn, this is who I am, this is how I want to show my learning, and these are the other classmates that I can do that with. This is my part. So that's step one, but then also an opportunity to tell a story from one perspective or a unique perspective and have that be layered. That's another really important piece in what this is. And I could certainly go on other examples of where I see AR moving, where I see AR moving in terms of equity and accessibility. I'll just end there with that example.
Thanks, Tom. These are great thoughts and examples. What I'd like to do now is open it up for questions. I think if you could just unmute yourself, everybody should be muted. So just think about unmuting yourself or type in the chat if you prefer, and we'll answer those questions or open it up for discussion.
How you doing? My name is Casey Joseph. I'm the instructional technologist at Loyola Marymount University, and definitely appreciate what you're showing, and also just the focus on differentiating learning, and that, you know, if this could be done for third, fourth graders, it could also be done in higher education. I'm curious though, how, you know, the juice has got to be worth the squeeze with the technologies always. And so there's some really interesting novel aspects that could draw attention. But in what ways do you think the medium could be exploited for higher education to accomplish that differentiated learning differently than any other medium? Have you seen examples of things that you've liked?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think that the kind of some of the same examples I showed, but like put into the brain and development of a much older learner, it certainly evolved from that. But you know, I think campus tours are in higher ed a big piece of where you can go to a physical location and experience something with that, you know, that same idea of going from one starting point and then going to the next thing. So like the same value that those students that were grabbing letters and putting them into order to spell something, that physical movement still applies to adult learners in terms of actually like learning by doing, that experiential learning. This is experiential learning on steroids. So those of you that are in the education realm and are students of education and John Dewey and all of that, you know, philosophy of feeling and experiencing what that means, I think you'll appreciate the fact that that never stops. I think that, yes, we can gain, you know, give young students these added pieces of perspective, but older students at the university level can certainly feel that as well. And then it also is a piece of accessibility. I think that, you know, one of the things that we were sort of playing around with is the idea of American Sign Language. You know, I was in Concord the other day at the Old North Bridge, which is, I know I'm speaking to folks all over the country here, but if you've not been to Concord, the Old North Bridge, very famous in Revolutionary War for the first shots fired. Well, if you go there, there's this kind of interesting, it's like a crank. And when you crank it, I don't know actually how this technology works. It's not digital at all, but you can hear the audio. It's basically like a record player. It's probably the old phonograph or whatever, but you crank it and then a guide will tell you about something. Well, for those that are deaf and hard of hearing, they can't experience that. There's no context there. They can't feel that. But if you were to overlay American Sign Language interpretation in front of different pieces, then that all of a sudden brings another layer of empathy building. And, you know, if you're designing that at the higher level, then it's really powerful to see how people can experience a space and learn from it with different abilities. And I think that is certainly one example that could be brought up to university. And I think we could probably go down a lot of different branches off of what that could mean. But the idea of curation museum,
like universal design for learning, accessibility, embodied learning, experiential learning, and then just giving students the opportunity to kind of interact in different ways with the medium. So that all makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I will just throw out one other example that I'm really excited about that I haven't put into practice, but this is going to go back to early childhood where the challenges are, but actually at the higher university level, it's really tough to teach kids time and space. So I have always struggled with finding a really good digital timeline where it sort of starts to spread out. And so like that much space is 100 years or whatever, and then that much space might be a little bit more. I really think that there's a lot of practical application to putting things physically using AR to space it out and say like 100 yards equals 100 years or whatever. So I would love to see someone at the university level be able to take that concept and give people this virtual timeline. And the idea of all these different mediums, be able to go and walk between spaces and have the audio follow you and then fade away and then go to another. Like you could actually have the music of a decade actually be playing, or the audio and giving you this full immersive tour. I nerd out on it. I get really possibility. And the problem is, when I'm working with fifth graders, they can't quite get there, but the older and older student I work with can, and then it brings it all full circle.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Sure. Absolutely.
Thanks. And just to add to that, and maybe we need to do a separate session on this with maybe higher ed or some universities that are using at least Hoverlay. So we know quite a few that are doing some interesting things. There's one thing that came to mind that because I just received, a thank you note from a student from ASU a couple of weeks ago, and she's working on bats in urban environment and housing for bats and so on. And she basically creates these bat houses, and she placed herself as a hologram next to each one of those to explain what this bat house, how it operates, how it works, and so on. And again, not something you couldn't do any other way, but the immersive aspect and the kind of the geofencing of it was really interesting, because now you're experiencing the storytelling in context of where it's meaningful. I think I thought this is a very interesting, novel way to think about content that is not just available anywhere, but specifically somewhere where it makes sense. And now you're kind of more immersed in the location. But maybe we can have another session and kind of drill down into some of those use cases and what people do with, journalism classes and, art classes and things like that. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for introducing this. So I teach at the university level, and I try to do sometimes exercises, and for me, it's the knowledge. How much time would I need to carry out a project, both to teach them technology, to make it happen, to have a project? I mean, what did your Concord project look like actually in terms of time?
So I think that specific example, they bit off a lot. I mean, they were incorporating the music department and the computer science students. So they all sort of had a lot of pieces that they're putting in there. So you could certainly go big and it could take a long time, but I think that really we're not looking for that. We're looking for how can you use this medium, or maybe you're looking for that. I mean, there are opportunities to kind of have multiple layers of a bigger, grander project that might incorporate programming and coding and all these pieces. But I do think that the best application of this is quick, making sure that the curriculum can keep moving. And for that, I really am excited about just the evolution of technology to use your phone now to scan objects. Like if I wanted to take an object from a museum and be able to, that's coming, that's here now, every week it seems like there's more advancement in that, but to be able to take our devices that are in our pocket and be able to scan around an object and then incorporate that really quickly into this AR space and build with, that's one way that it's just becoming so much more efficient. I think also the green screening, like it used to be that you had to have a huge green screen, you had to really like get it just right. Now you can sort of build within, and Hoverlay is one platform that does that. There are others, but to be able to have that be really quick and efficient and effective, it's all the ways that these different elements that make this up are getting better and faster and more accessible. The curation of all of these different materials, like if you wanted to go to Sketchfab or something else that you've got all these different designers and most of them offer up a free download of whatever the object is, then it just takes away the need to spend unnecessary time building that and constructing that. And if that was the goal in a graphic design course, then that's great. But most of us are trying to look at a medium like this to be able to teach history or literature, journalism, math, whatever it may be, and know that you don't have weeks to dedicate to something like this. So yeah, I would just say that the future is bright in terms of the efficiency that we can get there with. That Concord Academy example is probably a bad example to show the efficiency, because they actually were using that. I think it was like 8 weeks or something that those students kind of created that. But you know, some of those projects with like third graders, those took like 2 weeks, you know, or less. And so those really are better examples of kind of how quick it could be. It could just be a couple of classes.
Thank you, Tom. And there are a few questions in the chat, so maybe I'll tackle a few of those. So does Hoverlay generate QR codes for AR display, or does it create a link that you generate a QR code externally? Both. So I think we generate a link, and then with that link, we generate a QR code, but you could also create your own QR code or even embed this link somewhere else, like on a web page or something that's, you know, your traditional web, and then go back and forth between the web and AR, and vice versa. You can also link web content from within Hoverlay, so it gives you kind of a way to go back and forth. But from an activation perspective, you have 3 ways. You have the link and or the QR code, which are the same, it's just that we create a QR code with the link. And you also have the map, so you can decide, like in the case of Concord, you can pick a location where you geofence that experience. And then from that, Hoverlay is going to automatically create a map at like Pokemon Go in a way, but instead of chasing Pokemon, you might do a history tour or nature tour or river walk or something like that. So it's, yeah, those are the possible entry points. And in that case, you don't need to have any signage or anything. The app will give you the map to navigate to the next location that you need to be at to be able to unlock that experience. And I think it ties to the question from Andy. I teach 7th grade English and art in Northern California. Are there places where I can see example of this in my area? Possibly yes, but you can also, I don't know for sure. I think you can open Hoverlay and look when there are local experiences. The channel search, a little magnifying glass will give you a list of the channel that have nearby content. So if you're in an area where there's a tour, you will see it. Otherwise, you can go to the global channels, and those are channels that have content that's accessible from anywhere. So you would be able to, there are, for instance, experiences that are in Europe that you can activate at home, some museum experiences and things like that. So if you want to get a feel for how things look like spatially arranged around you, you can go to the global channels and find some of those.
Yeah, and Andy, I would just also add that the idea of a scavenger hunt is not only can you do that, and I can put another plug in for Hoverlay because they do it better than anyone I've seen, but in terms of that idea of having something stay exactly where it needs to be, the geo location aspect is so strong, and it really doesn't float or move on you. It's there, you place it there, you want to keep it there. But that idea of a scavenger hunt, think about all of the different possibilities for it's like a walking assessment. Hoverlay also gives the example of like where you hold something, you find an asset, it can trigger the next thing. So it's sort of like a choose your own adventure. If this happens, then you go there. You can create that. But another thing is that you actually pull up you can pull up a website within platform. It won't open a new tab or leave the browser. So where I've started to think about, well, couldn't you put a Google form in there and have whatever the somebody on that tour respond to a question that's being asked about something that they're seeing or something they're finding, and then that they submit that, and then you have that data right there. It could be kind of a unique, way to look at that. But yeah, a lot of possibilities, and for art, I think that specific to art, we've seen a lot of examples of different artists like creating murals and then having them talk about what choices they made with the mural right behind them. So you kind of create that with students too.
Yeah, and you can attach content to a reference image. So if there is a known visual feature in the environment, it could be signage, it could be a mural, it could be another art piece, it could be something that you can visually load into Hoverlay as a flat image, then you can use this as an anchor. And then in that case, you're going to have very specific elements that becomes your point of attachment for the content you're adding.
The Hoverlay was introduced by my professor Civic, and so I have been using Hoverlay for 2 years, and currently I'm working in the lab, working with to help with kids who have cerebral palsy. So I think overall Hoverlay is really good ARF for fast prototyping. What I did last week, I was using the Hoverlay to make a fast prototyping for like a map navigator to for the cerebral palsy kids to navigate in the real world situation, like from point A to point B, so they will be able to go to the therapy by themselves. So if I take a picture of a building, the efficient of the Hoverlay to diagnose the picture will affect by a lot of things, like lighting, like if there's a human there, or if there's an object in the way there, will be affected, and also will be affected by the speed of the internet. If I put a picture file in the environment, and I like the user to scale it and move it, I found that if I want to move it, I have to move along with my phone.
I think there's so for thinking about the audio, there is especially if I Northeastern, I think you have access to our sequencing module, which allows for timing things, placing things in time. So you play a video, then when these videos stop, say I want to show something, and then I want to hide something, and then I want to play, pause, an audio, and so on. And these are things that are available. Maybe they're not active on your account, or so feel free to reach out to me or to the lab at Northeastern. They have access to that. And that would give you access to those features that maybe now you're looking for as you're progressing in utilizing Hoverlay.
Yes,
there's an entire module around sequencing and to create interactive, scenes where you can tap a button, load something else, or things like that.
Yes, I'm using the University content. I don't find that I have the feature of turning on and turning off stuff. So
yeah. So send us an email. We can activate that for Northeastern students. They have this type of EDU account.
That would be much helpful, because just it get tedious. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and on the image, I think the thing to keep in mind is that this is in AR in general, when you're using the way this, and I think again these things are evolving by every month. I think they're progressing, but right now, kind of the state of anchoring is really based on images and recognizing a pattern in an image. So if you have a facade of a building that's very repetitive, for instance, or we have, like it's a skyscraper with rows of windows that all look the same, the image at one floor versus another floor, they look the same. So the phone doesn't have a way to know what exactly you're looking at, right? So there are things, and if you look in the doc, you will see what are the best practices in terms of what makes a good visual anchor. What are the characteristics of an image that you can use, or an element of the environment for anchoring content. But it's something that lacks feature. Something simple as that, very simple shape. something that's symmetrical, that doesn't have an orientation. So the phone doesn't have a way to know if you're looking up or down, if it doesn't have an orientation. Things like that, they're things to start to think about when you're designing for AR and for spatial computing in general. Now, again, I'm saying this is a point in time statement because I'm sure all of you have seen, the Vision Pro announcement of Apple, and there's a lot of things going on with regard to fusing other sensors to be able to recognize spaces and shapes and not just visually recognize things. And so these things are going to evolve fairly rapidly. There's also on the Android side, there's Snapdragon Spaces, which is a chip that's been created by Qualcomm specifically for wearable headsets. That has a lot more of those, what people call sensor fusion. So the ability to understand spatially a location without relying solely on the visual that can be, occluded or can have, poor feature levels and things like that. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. We have also training sessions and things where we can go into more advanced topics. We can really talk about those kind of use cases a bit more. For visually impaired student, is there an equivalent of alt text for images for AR? No, not that I'm aware of. I don't think that exists today. However, I think there's ways to use visual recognition, because again, what the phone does is that it turns on the camera, right? And it recognizes images. So let's say you're in a museum, you could have a system that would automatically pick up what image you look at and trigger an audio that would go with that image, but it would have to be something that is associated in Hoverlay. You would anchor audio to an image, and then that image for a sequence, and when I found this anchor, play that audio. That would be a way to do this. I feel like this is a space where AI is progressing so quickly that, I think pretty soon you'll have a generic way to describe an image. So it means you point your phone at an image and some algorithm is going to tell you, okay, this is what's in front of me. But I haven't seen that yet. Tom, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on this for visually impaired students.
No, I mean, I think AR is so visual. However, I mean, all of it, it's really how to access it at first. If you have that, then you incorporate the audio and pieces like that. But I agree. I think AI could end up being, the piece there where right now you can, obviously submit text and it'll show you an image. Well, you can also submit an image and it'll actually define it and describe it. So if that technology has so quickly been developed, I can't imagine that it won't have this application there for visually impaired.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I was thinking about what you said, Tom, about just like the timeline and being able to play music from that time, and then the geofencing, and just wondering if there was a way that text could help them navigate the visual, but the audio could be the experience somehow. But
that's really an interesting, yeah, that definitely. I mean, this is where I get so excited about this. It's sort of like a whole blank digital canvas of what's possible. It's just how to access it, right? And so that's where I think the older the learner, the more we can kind of play and experiment and create and find new uses.
All right. I think that's it. So thank you, everybody. I think, Tom, a big thank to you. And I'm sure you have a job that many would love to have, to be playing with technology all day and experimenting, and you're doing a really great work. And, I hope we can maybe have a follow-up, things moving so quickly, and being a year to see what's new and what has evolved and some of the new tech that's out there.
Yeah, I'm super excited, but bringing all of this to campuses and students and different ages is really exciting. But it's even more kind of exciting and thrilling to see just the evolution and just how fast it's evolving and what's coming next. And really appreciate you having me, and I appreciate everyone tuning in. I know a lot of my examples are probably at the lower student level, but if you can kind of imagine and visualize where that can go at the university level, then I think you'll share the excitement of what's possible with the medium.
All right, thank you, everybody. This has been recorded as well, so we'll, as soon as we process the video, we'll send you a link if you want to share it with others. Feel free to do so.